We're so glad everybody's here. I'm Elizabeth Powell, and I'm the presenter today. And, you know, it's interesting. I'm the founder of the Trauma Informed Academy of Fulbright Scholar in Trauma Informed Care, and I teach at Georgetown University Medical Center. But that's not why we're here. And if you'd like to turn your video on, I'm happy if you're eating or drinking, as long as it's family oriented. Feel free to do what you'd ordinarily do if you were sitting in a meeting, because that way it's easier for all of us to relate to each other. I will be taking questions and responding to them throughout the presentation. So what I'd like you to do is, when you have a question or something I'm saying prompts a thought that you'd like me to respond to, please just pop it in the chat and I'll look down and pick it up and we'll keep going. How's that? This is a presentation from University of Wisconsin at La Crosse for the Adolescent Health Symposium, and I'm very excited to be here. So let's get going. Now, there are some objectives that we're going to cover in this extremely short time that we have, and I'm happy to entertain thoughts and responses and questions following the presentation. You're welcome to email me. That'll be great. So in this presentation, what I'm going to do is talk about why might we want to frame overwhelming events as forms of chronic stress, and what are the relationships among self-care, sturdiness, and resilience? How about interconnections and self-regulation? And a little bit about Ginsberg's model. So this is some of the work we're going to be doing. If you think about the reason we ought to be thinking about overwhelming events, and those are events that we also call traumatic, but trauma is something that evokes really difficult images for people. So we've begun to talk about overwhelming events that cause people to fear for their life or their sanity, or that they might be badly injured. That way, folks aren't arguing with abuse and neglect and all the other awful things. They can say, well, if it threatened my sanity or my safety or my life, it overwhelmed me. The structural isms that we deal with, ageism, sexism, racism, all of those are chronic. Those are unrelenting stress on the mind and on the body. And the epigenetics studies that we're doing now show us that the impact of our past, even our ancestors, overwhelms us sometimes in the present, that we carry the impact of what our ancestors experienced, which contributes to health issues again. And that is invisible chronic stress that we deal with. Plus, if you look at the behavioral consequences and the potential for ongoing interactions that have strong reminders, which people often call triggers. But, I'm in the South and you're up in Wisconsin, most of you, I hope. And when you think about it, a trigger is not only a strong reminder, it's also a device on a gun. It's also something you set in software. It's also something on garden hoses. And when we talk about strong reminders of negative events, it's a little bit more accurate. So this is why I think we should really be thinking about overwhelming events or chronic stress. And if you know people, or if you have a history of overwhelming events in your life, whether it's medical crisis or natural disaster or any of the ACEs that we talk about, you'll see that these things have a long-lasting impact. And here's a good list to think about. Ordinarily, when we think about trauma, for example, we think about a very small set of events. It's expanding when you reframe it as anything that causes a person to think they might die or be badly injured or lose their mind. Suddenly, it's a lot easier to see just how pervasive these things are in our lives. Medical crises, bullying, homelessness, natural disasters, financial instability. Am I going to lose a job? Am I going to get a job? Do my parents have enough to feed me? Is there food in my house? And then the adverse childhood experiences, the structural isms I've already mentioned, neglect, accidents, crime, privatization, victimization, relational shifts. I don't know how many of you remember the first breakup you had as a teen, but it's probably devastating. Abuse, war, more. What about the adolescents in Bosnia, in Ukraine, in Russia? What about those of children who are in Gaza, in Israel? I think all of that is important to remember in terms of overwhelming events that folks deal with. And I know that, I believe, didn't you all just have a tornado in Wisconsin? Something we face in Tennessee more and more. Now, let me talk about what overwhelming events do. Not that we need a lot of reminder here, But the first thing is they evoke the feelings of change. And when we go through change, unless we are in charge of the change, we choose the change, and there's a high likelihood that we're going to get what we want out of it. Typically, people report feeling anxiety, a form of fear, awkwardness, anger, irritation, incompetence, a lot of loss-based feelings that are, again, things that in adolescence we may not have the tools to deal with. But these feelings engage the limbic system in terms of activating the reticular system and sending us into at least low levels of fight or flight, which causes us then to look at either being able to, if we can't fight, we can't run, we can't flee, we end up either with some degree of dissociation or some degree of paralysis, of the inability to act. The freeze part that I'm talking about is what occurs first. You all know what it happens when deer or rabbits hear something in their environment that they're not sure about. They freeze. And that's the brain trying to figure out, well, should I run? Should I stay and fight? Am I big enough to fight? Do I have the tools to fight? What are my chances of survival? And if that's not possible, then it's immobility or dissociation, one or the other. So this all changes the brain. If you happen to inherit a proclivity to these things, you'll find that the brain changes are transmitted epigenetically. We're beginning to see that markers of PTSD may have their foundations in previous generations, certainly, for example, among survivors of the Holocaust and near children, certainly among combat survivors. We just haven't done all the research to tease the rest out. So it's a balance, a blend of social determinants of health along with epigenetics. Now, I think in terms of adolescence, when we think about the real developmental tasks that adolescents face, we're talking about the sense of self, one's beliefs about one's place in the world. Is the world a safe place to be? Do I belong? Does anybody care about me? Emotional regulation, which children and adolescents may or may not have good skills in for a variety of reasons. One is if you grow up like this with your face in a device, there you go, a little bit higher up, you're probably not going to do a lot of regulating of your emotions except through the imaginative processes of video games. Your family may not have those skills. I'm a child of Appalachia, and let me tell you, we had I feel good and I feel bad, and I would have never busted a grin like I've got going on right now, because if I show you my feelings, you might use them against me. And in families where your life is difficult, this space is much safer because nobody knows what you're feeling and nobody can use your feelings against you. If you don't have skills in emotional regulation, by the time you hit adolescence, suddenly your adulthood becomes much more challenging. It automatically dampens your emotional intelligence, which is one of the easiest ways that youth and adults, even us, can increase our success at work and the quality of our relationships. The other thing that overwhelming events do is they challenge our sense of place and belonging, and they stall out learning. And let me just make it real easy about why they stall out learning. We like to make things easy in the Trauma-Informed Academy so that everybody can understand them. If you're so busy trying to survive because you think you might die or lose your mind or be badly injured, your brain is focused on one thing at that point in time, and that is keeping your body alive. No body, no reason for the brain to function. And so all the energy the brain is using is going into survival and not into learning. We see that in children where there have been traumatic events, that very specific developmental trajectories occur. The development that they miss because they're so busy trying to survive is stalled, and that development really only resumes when the environment is safe enough for them to go back and pick those skills up and learn them again. So you may be dealing with adolescents or adults who have what we call Swiss cheese development. And each layer has holes in places, but those holes don't necessarily overlap. And the final thing I'm going to talk about as a consequence is that long-term health changes as a result of chronic overwhelming events. The ACEs show us this in a very clear and compelling manner. And if you don't know the ACEs study, I encourage you to take a look at it. Now, how are we doing so far? How about some questions in the chat? What would you like me to talk about relative to what we've already covered? What questions do you have? Give me a second to think while I take a little bit of coffee. Coffee's nourishment. All right, I see that we're short on the questions, so let me do something different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms, and it's not required that you participate, but I think you might enjoy it. I'm going to put a question in the chat box. Excuse me. Oh, good. Well, yes, you can correct the Swiss cheese effect. Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Maria. You absolutely can. In adulthood, it takes a little more effort, a few different tools, but it's pretty easy. So I'm going to pop this in the box. Make sure I send it to everyone. And I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. Just select yes. You'll be there for 5 minutes. It's one question, and the question is, and I'll go on and post that. How does what we've discussed or what I've talked about so far shift or change your, not your, perspective on chronic stress? Here we go. All right, so here we are. And let me ask, what did you all discover in your conversations? Take yourself off mute. We'll spend about 3 or 4 minutes just talking. Any shifts that are worth mentioning? Any questions you brought up? Yes, Joshua.
So what I just explained this in our breakout room, but so I am a peer support specialist. So I have only been involved with like preventative work for a couple months now. So this is all like a lot of new information to me. And like I've learned about working with peers and their trauma and things like that. So a lot of this is just it's new, it's different side of things. So I'm really just absorbing a lot today.
Oh, that's great.
So I apologize that I don't have like a ton to really bring to the table, but it's a lot of good information and it gives me a great perspective. I do get to see how youth are affected by chronic stress in their homes or situations through mental health and substance abuse, but I don't live that side of it. So this is just a lot of perspective for me.
Yeah, I'm going to make an observation here. You can back me if you need to. I will accept it. What I want you to understand, Joshua, is that there's not a single person on this call or in this conference or on this planet that hasn't been affected by something so overwhelming that they thought they might die or lose their mind or be badly injured. So you're one of all of us who have that history, who is simply got a different set of equipment to deal with it. So if you can adjust to that perspective, and this is something for everyone to think about, of universal exposure with unique response, then those barriers between us and them disappear a little bit. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. And that way you don't have as many gaps to cross, because in a sense, just because, and I don't say just because it's always like, oh, that sounds demeaning. With the training you've had as a peer specialist, what you have is a different set of skills to help your friends, your neighbors, the stray cats, the rescue pets, and everybody else you come in contact with, that you exercise at a higher level and with different boundaries in your day-to-day work. Does that make sense?
You betcha.
Okay, cool. Hope that was helpful. Allie, is it Allie or Ally?
It's Allie. Thank you for asking. Yeah. Hi. So in my breakout session, I am an LCSW and an AODA therapist in the state of Wisconsin. I also consider myself a trauma therapist, and the fact that you, thus far, in your presentation, the fact that you use the terms or phrase overwhelming event to
Uh-huh.
just describe a trauma. And then like how instead of using the word trigger, right? Like using a different language, I
Right.
just feel like that is so approachable and such
Right.
an interesting perspective, right? Especially because I work with younger children and
Right.
using the term trauma, right? Like you use the term
Yeah.
trauma and they look at you with a blank face, right? Like you use the word trigger and they look at you with a blank face, right?
Yeah.
So just like
Yeah.
having different types of language to be able to communicate effectively even with the younger population is beautiful. So thank you so much for that. That's something that I discussed a lot in the breakout session.
I'm deeply grateful. I mean, there's so much about language that we can use. The last thing I want to do is help you all train people to be victims. And I grew up as a professional victim, and I found, oh my God, I've got to get rid of this. And the truth of the matter is, it really is all of us. If you go and do a conference, I used to teach in Washington for 5 years, Washington State, and I was doing a transformation project with the federal government for King County. And I said to this group of 100 and plus odd clinicians, so what do you call the people to whom you provide services? Consumers, they said briefly. I said, okay, so how many of you are doing your own work? And a few of them bravely raised their hands. I said, so you're consumers too? It's like, not me, I'm not a consumer. Anytime you find that you don't want to be called something that you're calling someone else, you probably ought to be checking out another way to talk about it. And that started me down the path of what is the plain language, not the tribal language of therapy or the tribal language of a this or that. What is the plain language that we can use to level the playing field and reduce the degree which we're accidentally othering each other in this work? So that's kind of how that came about. And that takes us right into self-care, sturdiness, and resilience. And the definitions are here really. It's pretty simple. The deliberate actions we take to support our health or actively manage any kind of illness that we might have. And sturdiness, I think, is a good word. Something that's kind of fallen out of vogue as language. But it's basically the quality of being strong, stable, solid, and less likely to break. And resilience is our capacity to recover from difficulties. And this is going to bring up another question in just a second. I wanted you to see kind of a Venn diagram and a relationship model of all these three feed each other. Self-care is not just getting a manicure. If you're just going to go get a manicure, you're just going to get a manicure. You know, that's my self-care. That's your physical care for your nails. The key element in trauma recovery and in building sturdiness is in meaning making. And meaning making involves a little bit more than just going to go do something. But we'll get into that with Ginsburg stuff. But these three are all really critically interrelated in terms of our long-term processes. So, you know, this is a question to think about, and you guys can just pop this in the chat. 2 things you do for yourself that support self-care, sturdiness, and resilience. What are 2 things you do? I'm going to put mine here because it's only fair for me to share with everybody. And C. Gilbert, thank you for your agreement about early chronic stress having a lasting effect on youth life. 2 things I do. One is I make potholders. I don't know if you all remember the potholders. Maybe you didn't. And the other thing I do is I garden. So what do you all do for your self-care? Without regard to whether or not you make meaning good, exercise, find time for family and friends. Excellent. Beach, super books and walks. Oh, that's great. And you know, I like paper books. Getting enough sleep, going for walks outside, crocheting. I believe my sister could crochet from here to Atlanta and back. Cuddling with the cat, family time, crafts. Excellent. Excellent. Yoga outside in nature. Going out with friends. Excellent. Running and baking. Superb. These are all great activities, and I'm going to show you how to jack up the benefit. Bowling. You know, Joshua, I did that once, and I have all of my joints dislocated, and I threw body parts around the entire bowling alley. It's really funny. Walking with friends, spending one-on-one time with your son with time does not usually allow. I'm going to give you all a heads up about what I do for my self-care. I'm pretty sure every one of you has busy calendars, just like I do. On my calendar, so that I don't have to lie about the fact I'm taking time for me, I write the word something. I make appointments with myself and I write the word something. So if somebody calls and says, can you go out, can we talk tomorrow morning at 9:30? I'm saying, I'm so sorry, I've got something on the calendar. And that something will be the time that I set aside deliberately for my self-care, to cook, to bake, to walk, to run, to cuddle with my sister's cat, get my hair done, listening to audiobooks. Something on the calendar is a graceful way to allow yourself to carve out some free time for yourself. This is a good question to ask the adolescents as you help them learn different ways of being. Now, I want to talk about the first tool I'm going to help you for starting this, that I'm going to help you to master here. I can't see you, so I don't know what you look like or where you are, and I'm kind of here hanging out with this real sort of austere Steve Jobs Apple look on. Interconnection is one of the self-capacities that Kohut talked about in the 70s in the beginning of self-psychology, which is one of the things we rely on. One of the impacts of overwhelming experiences, great, thanks, Kimberly. One of the things that we know about overwhelming experiences is that they impact a person's relationship with themselves, whatever the overwhelming experience is. And building a sturdy self requires paying attention to the self in a different way. The first tool that helps combat some of the isolation that sometimes occurs with overwhelming experiences or with device addiction is interconnections to others that we can call on in your absence. You know, if you think about these positive associations, every single person on this call has a favorite food, whether it's macaroni and cheese or not, it's a favorite food. You have recipes. You have songs, your playlists. You don't have songs you don't like on your playlist. You have songs you love. What are the stories behind the songs you love? You have gifts that people have given you that bring you great joy. I was looking, one of my friends gave me this little money thing that, you know, I can cha-ching. And when I'm feeling down or when I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the world is coming to an end and I can't figure out how to do this, I use that to remind me things always shift. And that cha-ching gives me a dopamine flood, which is exactly what I need at the moment. You know, some of you are wearing jewelry that someone gave you. Well, here's a piece I've got on that I just took off to show you. This turquoise bracelet was a gift to me from the Navajo Nation. And when I wear this, I remember the circumstances under which I received it and the people who gave it to me. And it feels like my face just lit up. Because it brings me that great sense of interconnection to other people. If you work in residential treatment or in a residential treatment program of some sort, you may have youth who come in who wear the same clothes over and over and over again, even though they have other clothes. Do you know the story behind the piece of clothing they're wearing? Is it a shirt that was their grandfather's that they beloved, that they really, really loved? Was it a gift from someone? And so if you begin to find out about these things, it's as easy as saying, hey, I noticed that you've got on a ring that you wear a lot. Tell me the story behind that ring. It may have been, well, I just liked it a lot when I saw it, or, oh, so-and-so gave it to me. Oh, great. Was that a friend of yours? Tell me about that friendship. And these are natural support things. These are not clinical things that you have to do just in the context of caregiving or providing services. You can do this with your granny, your grandpa, your nieces, your nephews, your friends, your neighbors, the people in your faith community. You can do these things anywhere. We often talk in faith communities about what would happen if you had a potluck and you had everybody bring their favorite recipe and tell the story of what makes it their favorite recipe. Ooh, I tell you, my Aunt Flora used to make a coconut cake that was just killer. It was 3 days. It was a 3-day cake. It had to sit so it could get juicy, and it weighed about 10 pounds. And she would set it down on a sawhorse and plywood on sawhorses at the family reunion. And you just hope you get a chunk of that. When she passed, somebody else, a younger woman, tried to put her cake in Aunt Floyd's cake place. And they would have nothing on it. It was moved, and she was given, somebody threw shade at her so bad she couldn't see straight for a day. But she was trying to do something that nobody had the room for her to do yet because the grief was too fresh. But that coconut cake has stuck with me for a long, long time. Getting people together to tell the positive stories about the things to which they have interconnections is very powerful. Animals, favorite animal. Now, and if you do this, say to them, be sure to set it up so you don't want to hear all the horrifying, terrible, awful stories about, well, my cat died in 2000 so-and-so, and oh my God, it was awful, and it was slow. And it was... No, my cat Charlie was the best cat ever. He was like a dog. He was a 13-pound Maine Coon cat. And if you came to my house, he would greet you at the door between me and you because he was guarding you. And he would stand up on his hind legs and dance like a rabbit. You want that end of the story rather than the other end of the story. So this is the most important thing that you can do for yourself and with others and with youth for self-soothing that changes the focus from the story of the overwhelming event to the story of the life we're building now. That's one of my favorite tools that has made such a difference in life for everybody. Self-regulation. In the Trauma-Informed Academy, when people, there's a logo, when people hang out with us, we call that elastic emotions. Self-regulation is a big word. My neighbors don't talk about self-regulation. They talk about feelings, turning them up and turning them down. And when you talk in the language of the people that you serve, you don't want to talk in your tribal language you paid a lot of money to learn. That's not what they talk when they get home. My neighbors came to me and said, we need your help. I'm going, okay, what's up? And I live in an old working class neighborhood, and I love it. They said, our daughter came home from counseling, and she was talking about termination. Are they fixing to kill her? And what is this thing about acting out? My husband acts when he goes out to perform music. What language do people use in their neighborhoods? And that is the language to use in your sessions and in your work so that you're helping them master the ability to live in their community and not in your professional tribe. Self-regulation is how we turn things up and down. Now, this thing about self-regulation, about these feelings, is that if you grow up in an area where people are not very good at expressing their feelings, or maybe they don't know, or maybe it's dangerous, if you're a person of color, if you are an immigrant where feelings are expressed differently, or if you've grown up in an environment where feelings are dangerous, you may have a flat face for a very powerful reason. This was the face of Appalachia. My mother happy. My mother sad. My mother angry to a point, then it got a little bit better. How do you learn the facial flexibility to let your face express what your heart feels? There's some really cool tools. Angela Garazzi, I see you've got on big glasses. Make your glasses touch your cheeks. There you go. See what happens to your face? Look at that. That's an automatic smile. And if you don't know what that feels like, and I didn't, it gives you a way to recognize when I do this, I'm smiling. And then all of a sudden there's this rush up from my heart out through my face. Now there are a couple of things I want you to write down about self-regulation. One is I want you to write down the phrase, where do people feel emotions in their body? And I want you, not now, but later, or now if you choose to go out and search for images of that phrase. My favorite is the Wired, I think it was Wired magazine. It's some work done in Finland by clinicians and psychologists and researchers who assign red and orange to feeling activated, like when my heart floods up to my face, or feeling deactivated, which is when you feel flat. Orange and red for activation, black and blue for deactivation. And they have pretty much discovered universal responses to standardized scenarios for what people feel where they feel activation and deactivation. Because many of us with histories of overwhelming experiences don't live in our bodies real well. It's a really great way to help people begin to look at, well, do I feel activated here? Might this be what most other people say this feeling is, based on where the patterns are? Might what I'm feeling in my hands and throat and neck, that tenseness, might that be anger based on what other people seem to feel then? And it's just a real easy way that you can begin to help people look at, if you live in your body and you're having the experiences that Finnish and Taiwanese and all the other people they've normed this against have, might you be feeling the same feeling or feeling like that? This is how you befriend those feelings. When people feel the methods for regulation, I kind of miss having the round knobs. Stoves don't, well, my stove in Nashville doesn't. Things that allow you to think about a continuum, a dimmer switch, a volume knob, a sliding switch, anything that allows you to think about how can I turn this up and down. You can use breath to do it. And then having a way to practice. And one of the easiest ways to practice is when people are acting out skits. I'm not necessarily talking about role playing. I'm talking about something distal to that, something one step further out. Because if we are doing karaoke, if we are creating a play, if we are performing, we are still acting out being another person. And we still have the opportunity to try on different feelings and see what they do. Now, here's how interconnections and self-regulation support sturdiness. One is it reduces what we call in our tribal language reactivity. It makes it easier for people not to go off like a bottle rocket because of all the neurobiological changes that occur that are self-protective. My sister, who is next door here in South Carolina, has a cat. I disturbed her cat when I first met her cat. I disturbed her cat by doing a lot of cleanup and a lot of work. And the cat has never gotten over that. Every time the cat sees me, the cat tends to like a Halloween cat. And the Halloween cat's a great example. You've got this cat who goes every time it sees you and hissing. And I even got a t-shirt that said Merry Christmas for my sister for that. This cat's showing me that it looks angry, but it's really scared. Helping to create that distance between stimulus and response, or stimulus and reaction, is part of what interconnections and self-regulation practice can do for folks, which increases sturdiness. A year and a half later, I've been talking to the cat, letting the cat know I love it, respecting its boundaries, making sure I give it treats when it's appropriate to give it treats, and not expecting it to love me the way I want it to, expecting it to have the same neurobiological reaction it's had and that it has to train itself out of to decide that I'm a safe person. All of these things, this reduced reactivity, helps with choice making and judgment. And one of the things that we forget is that for people where chronic and overwhelming events occur beginning in childhood is you don't learn how to make choices. If you've ever heard anybody say, God, you have such poor judgment, you're probably talking about someone for whom making choices was dangerous. And if making choices is dangerous, if you've made the best choice you know how as a child in a difficult situation and bad things still happen, how do you know how to trust your choices? It's not necessarily that people have poor or bad boundaries. They have the boundaries that worked in the environment that they were in. Those boundaries simply need adjusting. And for youth who are learning about the boundaries in young adulthood relationships in terms of gender and sexuality and relationship, and they've changed since most of us grew up, this is really important. Choice making. You'll have people that you work with who say, I don't have any choices. Okay, I've got, how many shirts do y'all have in your closets? And down here, I've got 9 long sleeve t-shirts, 2 black turtlenecks, a salmon colored turtleneck, a green turtleneck, and the rest are scoop neck shirts of different colors. Why did I choose this one? I chose this one because it gives good contrast, and because I'm cold, and because it keeps my neck warm, and also you don't see my waddle that makes me feel like a goose. There's some real reasons. How many shirts do people have? Why do they choose the one they choose? How many of y'all hit the snooze button this morning? That's a choice. How long did you brush your teeth? That's a choice. Did you use your right hand or your left hand? That's a choice. But we forget the most basic fundamental practices of choice making and how they are impaired as a result of chronic stress. And helping people master the knowledge and the awareness of, it's just a choice. What do you want for dinner? Good Lord, it's 1,095 meals if you have 3 a day between now and this time next year. How much does it really matter? Getting these things into simple everyday language makes it a whole lot easier. Even if an adolescent who's likely to say, it matters a lot because it's my dinner and I want what I want. Okay, great. So we've got 3 things here. Which of these 3 is going to work for you? And using a smaller option set makes it a little bit easier. These things, developing stronger interconnections and self-regulation skills, even if they're just minor, support sturdiness because reactivity drops and pro-social behavior is easier to muster up. If I'm less likely to go off like a bottle rocket, I have more room to be kind and compassionate and friendly. I have more room to support someone who is being bullied and to support someone who's bullying them in a different way. I have more room not to snark off at my parents. And here's where this comes from. Most Western clinical thinking that we have in psychology and social work comes from a perspective of white European male thinking. That's just historic. I don't mean that as a judgment on anybody. But look at all the names of all the people who've come up with all the theories. You'll see what I'm talking about. Almost always it focuses on how we are individuating, how we are separating from others. Jean Baker Miller, a female psychiatrist in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, said, what if it's not about how we separate? What if it's about how we change connections? What if it's about how we change connections? The child, the youth who is leaving home to go to college is clearly moving away from their parents. That is also a change in connections. That one change in frame makes it easier to be pro-social and to be sturdy. Are you following me? Okay. All right. So I'm going to take you back to a question again, and I'm going to put you in chat rooms, and I think they're going to be different. And this is a complex question. I'm sorry. I sometimes have a hard time asking easy ones, the simple ones. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms and talk to each other, have a good time. Oh, I love it. I see. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to do this again. Don't know if you'll end up in 7 rooms, 5 to 6 people each. I'm opening all rooms. I'll give you 7 minutes. And let me tell you, you'll feel like it's not enough time, and it isn't. And it isn't. But that's okay. If you just get started, it'll work. Here we go. Okay, so I saw a couple of pings here and there. Quick summary. Who wants to tell me what the group came up with?
We had a little conversation about how like self-regulation, like seeing adults model self-regulating behavior is really helpful in being sturdy, but also like what self-regulating is to like your mom might be very different than what it is to your dad. And so mom, might want to just talk it to death, or maybe even get, a little elevated, like this is really frustrating. And dad might want to go and be quiet for 24 hours or something. And so when you're looking for your, intimate partner in life, you're like generally looking for someone who kind of models what your parents did in some way, like that's what's comfortable to you. So if they do something completely different, it's not a good match. But I think having modeled 2 different kinds of self-regulating, like from what each parent is good and healthy for kids to be able to flex in that way.
Absolutely, and helping kids different people do it different ways, but there are a couple of ground rules. Avoid injuring other people physically. Avoid violence. Big muscle activity is great. I had a little thing happen a couple of weeks ago where I was involved in an accident, and I got home and I had so much adrenaline in my body from that. I went out and I dug up a 50-foot French drain, because I had to get it out of my body. But I have a friend who went inside and was just on the bed for a couple hours because they needed to sleep it off. And so there are a lot of different ways to do it. Another thing to have folks do is look up the synonyms. I use anger first because anger is the one that scares us. There are over 50 synonyms for anger, and they're all a little bit different. And when people begin to figure out the different words, then you have to say, well, what's the difference between a cat fit and a hissy fit? And if you were going to write, pardon my language, being pissed off, and you've got 20 kids in the room, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does pissed off fit for you? Is it a 0? Or is it nothing? Or is it a 10? And you'll find out suddenly it's a 3 and a 5 and an 8. And say, well, what are we going to do with that? Because if it's 3 to you and an 8 to you, how are you going to react to each other? And even doing that in families is a good thing, because children and adults will have different degrees of what a scale is. So this supports adolescent and adult sturdiness. Plus it shows if you model it, when you're saying, God, I'm feeling so frustrated right now, I can just scream and pinch my own head off. And what I'm going to do instead is this, because I know I can do this. We help educators learn that when children are beginning to misbehave, not act out or act up, but misbehave in class, we say, take a minute and pause. It will make you look wise. They will not know what you're going to do. And while you're pausing, think about, can this student still learn? Yeah. Can I still teach? Yeah. And then you can keep going. and it totally bumfuzzles the kids. So these are good things to think about. I want to move now into pure resilience. Kenneth Ginsburg came up with this model, and I think it's a fabulous model. He's done some research. It was actually done with adolescents. Some organization development, people say we are all 4-year-olds hiding behind big people masks. So I use this with adults as well. These C's, and we've been talking specifically about 3. One is coping, one is control, and the other is connection. These C's, and by the way, these handouts are available to you in Canvas. We use this handout, we treat it like a spider diagram. We ask people to rate where they are 0 to 10 in terms of current moment. My coping skills are high, my contribution is high. My control, I'm in a very rural area the county has 10,000 people in it. So I don't have a whole lot of choices and selections just here because there's so few people. My confidence is pretty good. My confidence, there you go, confidence, so you can see it, is pretty high. But getting people to simply look at these is key. And if we do these as adults before we try to help kids learn how to do this, it makes it easier. And if we won't do it, why should they? Now, if you think about it, I'm going to skip this because you all have done a good job with that. I want to talk to you about the stuff that we need to learn. This is the model, and let's see, I'll get out of the way just a little bit here so that you can see more. What we teach, we don't think that healing and personal development after chronic stress is linear. We know it's more circular. We know that it goes in different points. So we actually teach the separate modules, these elements that relate to Ginsburg's 7 C's in different ways. And we use different language so that we bypass all of the social modeling and learning that we get, the tribal language. And if you look at why you want kids to learn trauma mastery skills through this lens, and by the way, the same lens applies in social emotional learning. If you all look at these skills, these are the same skills in social emotional learning. Same skills in emotional intelligence. We did a major review of the literature during the pandemic and discovered that they were pretty much the same skills for trauma mastery across trauma psychology. And so we figured that if we could begin to help people learn this stuff in a different way, number one, it might make the clinical work easier. And number two, it might help people have more resilience against the normal distresses of everyday life that a lot of us just don't have any skills for. So we got to learn this stuff somehow, and helping people learn it is really important, especially in adolescence, which is another of the times when the brain is growing so very, very much. I want you to understand that when you can help adolescents by helping them learn what they want to do and helping them do it, which is a common tool in some Scandinavian companies, when you can help them with these things through everyday language and everyday action, then suddenly you're helping them with this as well. You're helping them overcome the impact of the chronic stressors. Now, if you pick a C, and this is just a practical tool, any of these C's that you see, and you relate it to something in the adolescent's life, and you compliment them on that skill, it makes a big difference. It allows you to help them begin to do it in a way that's not fake. I have a young friend who's 16 going on 13, and recently I saw them share a sandwich with somebody. I said, well, it's so good to see you support your friend who didn't have a sandwich by sharing a sandwich with them. It shows that it tells me a lot about how you feel about options that you have. And I just ran through the list and paid them pounds and pounds and pounds of compliments. Try it with your adults. Kind of move a little to my left. I think, how's that? I'll duck a minute. There you go. And you can see it top of my head. Thanks for asking. But it really makes it a whole lot easier to help the youth begin to see different ways of being. When you take this schema that Ginsburg has tested and begin to look at how can I complement adolescents on the skills they've developed already and help them foster more of them in a natural way. Youth workers, clinicians, faith leaders, family members, and friends can all use this one, and that makes a big difference. By the way, when it's developed already, and help them foster more of them. And a leader brain is growing so very, very much. I want you to understand that when you can help adolescents by helping them learn what they want to do and helping them do it, which is a common tool in some Scandinavian companies, when you can help them with these things through everyday language and everyday action, then suddenly you're helping them with this as well. You're helping them overcome the impact of the chronic stressors. Now, if you pick a C, and this is just a practical tool, any of these C's that you see, and you relate it to something in the adolescent's life, and you compliment them on that skill, it makes a big difference. That allows you to help them begin to do it in a way that's not fake. I have a young friend who's 16 going on 13, and recently I saw them share a sandwich with somebody. I said, well, it's so good to see you support your friend support your friend who didn't have a sandwich by sharing a sandwich with them. It shows that it tells me a lot about how you feel about options that you have. And in your, I just ran through the list and paid them pounds and pounds and pounds of compliments. Try it with your adults. Kind of move a little to my left. I think, how's that? I'll duck a minute. There you go. And you can see it top of my head. Thanks for asking. But it's, it really makes it a whole lot easier to, there you go, to help the youth begin to see different ways of being. When you take this schema that Ginsburg has tested and begin to look at how can I complement adolescents on the skills they've developed already and help them foster more of them in a natural way. Youth leaders, youth workers, clinicians, faith leaders, family members, and friends can all use this one, and that makes a big difference. By the way, when it comes to coping and self-regulation, there are 3 basic feelings that we focus on when we help kids and adults think about elastic emotions. The first one is anger, because it's the scariest one. Anger is often a mask for fear. And when you help people begin to befriend the anger that they have and understand it's powerful and helpful, it makes it easier to say, I was really scared behind that. Just like that cat in the corner. It makes it a whole lot easier. So you begin to help people use the natural supports they have in the environment. Look at this. Look at some of the media that youth are exposed to. What do you think that some of these characters in this game are showing, and what might they be feeling in the process? You can actually use Dungeons and Dragons to do a great deal of this, but most of us don't think about that. So there are a lot of great ways you can use to support the development of sturdiness and self-resilience through self-care. Here's what we know. We know at the Trauma Informed Academy, I know it as a generational educator and a great believer in this work. If you can learn, you can heal. If you learn, and learning is not non-pathologizing. It doesn't set people up to stick their hand out and say, oh, I'm a survivor of, and I have bipolar disorder. You can't blame me for anything. If you can learn, you can heal. Learning requires no diagnosis. The skills that you need, they are common best practices in child rearing and the skills that are common to SEL, EQ, and trauma recovery. And that is really critically important. Now we've got a minute left. I'm here. I'd love to hear y'all's questions and feedback.